Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another very special episode of Dead Men Talk. And as we start winding series 4 down, I couldn't sort of finish without at least bringing the horror aspect back. Dead Men Talk started way back with me talking about my horror work, and I love it when I can bring on guests within that realm, especially my current guest here today. He's not only a horror author, but I'm very, very jealous off the bat. He's also been involved in filmmaking and screenwriting. He's got some great credits to his name, including London Heist, 10 Dead Men. So Dead Men Talk, you're on the right show already. And what I feel is going to be a cult classic one of these days, Paintball Massacre. I welcome to the show Chris Regan. How are you, mate?
Oh, great. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. No worries. It was a pleasure when I got the opportunity, when you got in touch. I knew I had to try and bring you on to this series as well before I sort of finish up.
Right.
And we'll delve in. We'll sort of see kind of what happens over the next over the next half hour. So we've got a lot to talk about. You've done a lot of stuff which I really want to climb inside your brain. And sort of see what's made you tick and how these things have come about, because horror films, horror books, anything horror really has been sort of massive influence for me creatively over the years. And I mean, I guess the easiest, without launching into song, the best place to start is at the beginning. If we wind it right back then, so your writing, when did it start? What was the start? Was it novels that you started with, or was it the films, or how did it begin for you?
Yeah, it was like when I was a kid. I mean, I started really young. It was short stories, and I wrote a novel when it wasn't published, but it was when I was 15. But and then I but in my sort of later teens, I got really into films. I've always been into horror. Like, horror was always the thing. The novel was horror, and I was always into that side of things. But I got really seriously into films in my teens. But I was a bit of an awful film snob when I was at college. And I got into lots of. My dad's a huge film fan, so he was always showing me stuff, and so I sort of realised at that point that the novels and the stories were I was doing them because I hoped that one day someone would make that into a film. So I thought maybe you could skip that bit.
No, that is on my when I've written my stories, I've always visualized them as a movie, and it is my one. If I've got anything on my bucket list, it's to see any one of my books on screen somewhere. So no, I definitely share in that.
Yeah, and that was the thing. And then I think it was the big turning point, I think, because of my age. Like Tarantino was a massive influence. I mean, I'm not that huge a fan of his sort of later stuff, but they just released, and also like film magazines and stuff, where this is sort of like mid to late 90s, so the film magazines were really popular, and like I think one of the film magazines gave away the script for True Romance as like in like paperback. So I had a copy of that, and it was I think it was the first time I sort of looked at something and gone, oh, I sort of see. I didn't realize that films were written like this. Like this is how you do it, and it's sort of a weird. It's a bad starting place, really, because obviously no script is written like a Tarantino script. He's got his own very distinct style, and they're almost like novels. But that was it. Sort of started. So from there, I started writing scripts, and that carried on. Sort of throughout at university, and I studied screenwriting at university, and took it from there.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Obvious question then, and I guess you probably get asked this a lot. What's the biggest difference? There is obviously quite a big difference. I've looked at the idea before of screenwriting, script writing, trying to turn an idea of one of my books into something like that. And I've looked at a script and I'm like, or screenplay, and I've just been scared. Really, it's just, I don't know how to get my head wired like that. What is the biggest difference or the biggest challenge between writing a novel and writing a screenplay?
Oh, that's quite hard. I don't know. I found it really difficult because I've only recently, the last couple of years, it was really sort of in lockdown that I properly started writing novels again, and I found it really difficult transitioning back into kind of novels because I found and it's probably obvious from the first couple of books I've written as well, but the sort of and I suppose this is one of the major differences is screenwriting is so kind of minimal. It's and it goes back to why that Tarantino script wasn't a great place to start, because his particularly the way he opens a scene is like paragraphs of text about what's going on, whereas I mean people do it differently, and I don't think there are any set rules, but mostly you encourage, brevity is encouraged. It's the less you put on the page is better, really. And it's also, well, I guess the biggest thing is the visual aspect, because, and this is again quite hard, I found quite hard sort of getting back into, is because you can't go inside a character's head in film. No. Really, you can do voiceovers, and there are techniques to do it, but for the most part you're doing you're trying to show their thought processes by their actions. Sure. And by sort of, and you can do things like describing their rooms and where they live and things like that. You can kind of get bits of it across, but mostly it's through visuals. So that's tricky. So that can be a bit tricky. But if I'm being honest, possibly more the biggest difference, and it doesn't really apply to writing if you just decided tomorrow to write a screenplay, but the biggest difference is writing a novel is very much a solitary sort of pursuit, which is one of the things I really like about it. I think that you are kind of on. I mean, yes, you get feedback and you get editors involved and stuff like that, but for the most part, it's you on your own. Whereas screenwriting, like, it can be that, and it is like that for a lot of the process. But once you get into the actual process of making something, it becomes this collaboration. And I think that's one of the things that makes filmmaking so interesting, is it's not an individual's sort of thing. Yes, you have the director who has the vision usually, but there's some arguments over how sort of different visions competing on a film. But the thing is that it has to be, because you've got all these different people and they've got actors involved and all these different things. It has to be a sort of collaboration. So I think that's it's not really a process difference, but it's just that's why the two things seem so separate to me. Filmmaking to me is like a group thing.
I never thought of it like that, actually, but it makes perfect sense. That you've got that team involved and everyone's got their own take on it. I suppose you may write it, but someone else could. It's kind of like I've always wondered. So what you do as a screenwriter, where does your role finish in terms of how much detail you put down, and then where the actors take that character? Do you have to map a lot of it out, or do you leave a lot of it to their own sort of interpretation of what you put down?
I think it all depends on who you're working with and the process. Like, it won't be in the script. Like, obviously the dialogue's there, and you put some directions in there, and you can kind of indicate. You can sort of indicate obviously you can indicate emotions if someone's crying or whatever, but that tends to be sort of frowned on, because you don't want to sort of, unless it's explicit for story purposes, you want to try and leave it sort of open. I don't know. A bit different people will think different ways. Like, this is where it gets complicated, is when you're trying to when you're in the sort of like the tiny details of a scene and you're trying to convince someone else of whether it works or not. But I think in terms of actors, I think because I've made short films as well, and I find that when I'm working with actors, I would like them. I found it most rewarding when they kind of take it and just go off and do their own thing. I'm not someone who's precious about dialogue, and I think that as long as I think it's sort of insane, and obviously some writers do it, but like, I think it's a big ask to expect a screenwriter to be able to, I know novelists as well, to be this applies to, but to to be able to take all these different voices and to speak with those voices kind of authentically. And a lot of the time you can tell, and I think like I keep, if you look at Tarantino, I think he's someone who, if you look at something like particularly like something like Death Proof, it feels like all those characters are speaking in his voice. These aren't sort of, and he sort of gets away with it a lot of the time, and sometimes it works, and you know, especially early on, it works really well. But I think that's true of a lot of stuff, and I'd prefer that the actors come in and be able to sort of give something and put their own spin on things. I think that's always, and it's really, I find that really exciting when it happens. That like when you see people bring their own thing to something you've written. I think that's really cool.
It's had some sort of effect on them. Plus, you know, it's a surprise to you, I suppose. You're not expecting every single moment as you've written it, sort of thing. So you're experiencing it for the first time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think it just makes it feel more realistic. I mean, it's more authentic if these people are speaking in their own voices and yeah, obviously not changing everything, but I'm talking about just sort of odd words, but like and so it doesn't always work. Like sometimes people want to throw stuff in, and it's and also directors have their own input on things. Sometimes directors will be like, no, this has to be verbatim as it's in the script.
Someone's got to have the book, as it were, and you know, in wrestling terms. You know, it's their, you know, they get the final say on sort of how it turns out, I suppose, and stuff like that.
And I think it's a shame that what happens in film is that you don't get that you don't tend to get, especially the level that I've been working at, where it's all fairly low budget and there's everything's kind of, oh, we've got these 2 weeks, let's go and do this now. But you don't get that sort of rehearsal time, which is when I mean, everything I've done, there's been kind of read-throughs, like table reads, which is good, but it's not quite the same as like breaking a scene down and working it out exactly how it's going to go. Like in the stuff I've worked on, most of that rehearsal and the kind of blocking things that will happen on the day in a sort of rushed kind of way, but which is a shame, because I think some really great stuff can come out of that. But
you say what you've mainly worked on is sort of, you know, low budget, independent, however you sort of term it. A couple of the films that you worked on that I've seen, they've got some recognizable names in there. Craig Fairbrass, was it London Heist he was? So I went past him. I didn't meet him, but he was at a Comic-Con down our way a couple of years ago. So in the same room as him. But I've seen he's done a lot of these sort of films, you know, in recent years.
Well, I think recently, particularly, he seems to be doing. He's almost had a bit of a renaissance where he's kind of become much more of a serious actor. I think London Heist was around the time he was kind of transitioning from like a sort of more of an action gangster type person. They're still all kind of prime films, but I think he's regarded much more as a serious actor. But he's a really nice bloke, Craig. He's all right, because he wrote that was his script. I mean, I was brought on initially just to give him some notes, because it was with a production company in Brighton that I was working with, and it kind of came through them, and they just asked me for some notes on it. And then I initially got talking to the producer about it, and eventually met Craig, and we chatted about it, and he was like, "Oh, can you do a draft on it?" And we sort of did a few back and forth drafts on the script. But that's one of those ones, and I think this is probably more akin to sort of working as a professional screenwriter on bigger projects. Like I watched that film now, I can't really tell you what's mine and what was there originally. Like it was like already quite far along by the time I got it, and it was really, there were a lot of structural. It was more structural. I mean, this is the thing about screenwriting is that's tricky. It's really the hardest bit is the structure, and because there are things you can do and it is hard in novels as well, but I think
Mm.
you have a bit more leeway to kind of do different things. But in screenwriting, you do have to stick to a fairly strict, unless you're making something yourself, and you can kind of
Yeah.
But generally you have to stick to a fairly strict structure, because otherwise you just lose the audience. And I think the problem with the thing with London Heist when I got it was that, I don't remember, but he spends half the film in Marbella and then half of it in London, because he's sort of on the run. And the script, when initially it had several trips going backwards and forwards between Marbella and London, and the main thing for me was like, well, that doesn't make any sense, because he's from the beginning he's on the run, so you kind of need, it just doesn't, it's just, you end up jumping through hoops to try and explain how he can come back and forth. So that was
okay. And that's something simple on the surface when you sort of fresh eyes almost, or step back and and provide that sort of feedback, and then it's kind of like, it's obvious then, isn't it, where the issue is.
But this is the sort of what about the collaboration as well, is that because it wasn't the thing we just sort of disagreed on was, and it's still in the it's still in the film, it's that I know it's been so long since I've seen it, but there's the big and I won't spoil it, but there's a big plot twist which is all about his sort of Craig's character's dad, but it's most of it's to do with another character. I forget the character's name, but it's all about this other character who you never see. And I had a real, like, we went back and forth on it for ages. So I was just like, you can't have a plot twist that involves a character we never see, because the audience has no reference point for it. And it's still kind of, I still feel like it doesn't quite work. It doesn't quite have the sort of punch that it should do, because it's all about him uncovering this big secret in his family, but because you don't see this other character, it just doesn't land as well.
You feel like you've been strung along, don't you, if something like that happens? It's kind of like, well, I was expecting it to at least go in this kind of direction that you've been building towards, but it's completely I completely get that. Some of my most frustrating cinema experiences have been with things like that. I don't mind plot twists, I absolutely welcome them, but they got to be to be done right and fit, don't they? Let's talk about Paintball Massacre then. My wife and I watched it at the weekend.
Oh, cool! Amazing.
Right up our street. You know, we've been horror fans for ages. We've seen some truly awful ones. I'm not putting yours in this at all.
Good.
Just saying, you know, we've seen like the Hollywood blockbuster ones. We've gone right down to the real kind of dodgy ones. And I mean, right off the bat, tagline on the poster that I saw. It's a mix between Dog Soldiers and Hot Fuzz. One of the first things my wife says once it gets into it is, this reminds me of Dog Soldiers. She had never seen that poster.
Oh, brilliant.
So there you go. That definitely, and I definitely get the Hot Fuzz thing. It is a typical British comedy horror slasher. Right. It is brilliant. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Cool. I'm really glad you liked it.
That's all.
It's a bit worried. Come on, you'd be like, oh, that was
No. I like to be honest, and to be fair, I think horror is the one genre that my wife and I are very, very open about, because like I say, we've watched all kinds of them over the years, and I've spent money on some real low budget ones, and in one breath I think it's the best thing on earth, and then by the end I think this is an absolute trite. We'll openly say it, because there's some really, really, you know, shoddy ones out there, but I had a lot of I found some a lot of fun. Even just the premise, it's like, okay, the title Paintball Massacre, you don't need much more to explain what's going to happen, to be fair. How did the idea come about? Firstly, let's start there.
So this one was the way it came to me, because it wasn't my idea to begin with. It was the producer Brendan. I'd worked with him on 10 Dead Men. He was the actor, and he was the lead actor in 10, which was this really low budget film we made in Brighton in the 2000s. And so he was the lead in that. We stayed in touch, and then the director Darren Berry, he was I'd worked with him on and off over the years, and we at the time we were kind of working on. We were sort of casually talking about working on something together, and then so he was in touch with Brendan, and Brendan mentioned this idea to him, and he came to me with it, and so I can't remember exactly. So it was the way it was presented to me was they hadn't fully fleshed it out. It was they had the school reunion, and then they go and they go and do paintball, and then people start getting killed, and they had the idea that they would be killed in a way related to their professions, and some of the kills have been worked out. So that was what was given to me. There weren't really any sort of characters or any kind of the actual sort of story wasn't there, but that sort of basic premise was there already. But I think quite quickly I was like, this can't be. Well, it's funny. I wanted to. I knew it wanted to be funny, but we never really referred to it as a comedy until it was filmed.
Okay.
Which I know seems ridiculous when you watch it, because clearly, I mean, I remember when we discussed, I think the first kind of comedic element we talked about was when the guy blows up on the landmine.
Yes.
And like, so that was in there from fairly early on. That is Brendan. That's the producer.
Right.
Him kind of doing this big speech and then stepping the landmine. That was kind of or spoiler, but that was
no. It's only one of them. There's some great ones in there.
Oh yeah, it might be in the trailer, but so that was the. So I knew I got a bit of license to go there, but the big thing for me, I guess in terms of the sort of process was, there's a character called Sarah who is this. I mean, she's sort of a cliche. She's sort of a typical stoner character, but she has this speech in the film about the Fast and Furious films, and that was like the most important thing for me, because I kind of figured out, like, that was how I sort of figured out the tone, because it was a speech that I'd written. Originally it was about Star Trek. It wasn't about Fast and Furious, but it was this sort of stoner film fan speech, and that I'd written in something that wasn't ever finished. So I was like, I'm going to use that speech, and from there I kind of built up that character, and I was like, okay, and that set the tone of it for me, was that it's not a sort of comedy where it's full of jokes, but the way these characters sort of react to things is going to be funny.
It's typically British, I will give you that, and it is British humor. It's something that you can only expect to have over here with the likes of Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, things like that out there. And done perfectly with that. But, touching on the way they die, just quickly, like you touched on, there was a method between behind how they die. I really love that in a film, because it's not mindless. Then once you realize that, you're really intrigued even more, because it becomes really imaginative. How can you do this? And again, I'm not going to give any of them away, because I think people need to watch it. There are some cracking ones in there, especially with the estate agent. I quite like that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. I think that's one that they already had worked out. That's one.
Cool.
But I mean, that was like the other sort of big turning point in writing the script was I approached it like an Agatha Christie mystery as well. That was a big thing, because I went back and read when I was working on it. I went back and read And Then There Were None, and it is like a prototype for the slasher film. Like it's I think it's 10 characters. It's a bunch of characters turn up to this island, and then they're killed off one by one, and they're all killed off in weird ways.
That is quite a blueprint, isn't it? I can think of already loads that follow that. Yeah.
Well, it's even got the Crazy Ralph character. Like at the beginning of And Then There Were None, there's a guy at the docks who tells them not to go to the island. So it's all there.
Is that the guy behind the bar in this one? Is that the barman?
So that was the point of the guy. Yeah, that was the point of the guy behind the bar. Yeah, don't go down to the quarry. Yeah.
Another big name in there that I recognise is Nicholas Vince, wasn't it?
Yeah,
the Chatterer from Hellraiser.
Yeah. So I got him involved because I was on his podcast ages ago, and I was doing a web series, and so he interviewed me for his podcast, and we sort of stayed in touch on and off, and they needed someone. They wanted someone for that barman character who was, they were trying to get a sort of cameo, and they were going to all kinds of people, and it was getting close to the shoot date, and they still hadn't sorted it out. But that, and I was like, oh, Nicholas would be great for this. But it was a weird one because they couldn't work out whether, and casting Nicholas in it sort of made the decision for us, because we couldn't work out whether it should be a sort of comedic cameo or like a horror cameo. I was like, it needs to be the Crazy Ralph, it needs to be the sort of horror thing. But there was a point where they were looking at I think they had a connection to Martin Clunes and a couple of other sort of people like that, where it was going to be more of a kind of I guess like Katie Brand is in it, more of a kind of, here's this comedian doing a cameo in it. So but I'm glad that it went the way it did, because I think that's it just needed, without it because I really, it was really important to me that the horror didn't start too early, because I really like to get to know the characters. I think if you don't get to know the characters before the killing starts, then you just don't care.
You don't,
like,
do you?
well,
no.
Yeah.
Completely.
So but at the same time, when we didn't have that scene with the barman, it sort of didn't quite feel like there's just a bit of, it's only tiny, but there's a bit of threat that comes from him saying don't go here. So
but like kids, it's like saying don't touch the red button, isn't it? Really, it's going to happen as soon as you know they've said that. Well, it can only go wrong. So
well, exactly.
I got to ask as well, because I'm down in Devon. I'm not a million miles from sort of Yeovil, Sparkford, where it was filmed. Do you know what is there any significance behind having it there? Was it somebody involved in it who was from there? Or?
Yeah, so the other producer, Joe Hellett, he was really sort of the one who got this got the funding and everything for the film. So he's from there, and there was some early on we were talking about. I think we were looking at filming it kind of outside London, just because most of the cast were going to be from there, and the director lives there, and it sort of was going to. So we were looking. I think we were looking at a few places, but then I think Joe and Brendan together, because Brendan's sort of around that area or somewhere in the middle maybe, but they found this place, this quarry that was being used for a paintball paintball games.
Right.
There was a paintball company kind of using it, and so they went and looked at that, and basically it had everything there. It had it had sort of a wooded bit, and it had these hills and things, and everything was there that they needed. So they ended up moving it there. It sort of made it, in some ways, made it more difficult, because then everyone had to travel there. You had to put. I mean, most of the budget went on. And I don't know exact figures, but I'd say a lot of it went on accommodation for the cast and crew. It's this weird thing when you're sort of working on really low budget stuff. Like there's such a massive difference between like doing it on favor. Like I've done stuff before where where you're just asking for favors, and everyone works for free, and they do it because they're interested in the project, or they're doing you a favor, and then you do something for one of theirs. But the next step, even if you're doing something with a crew of like 5 and 3 actors, like if you decide to pay all those people minimum wage and put them up in a hotel and feed them, then quite quickly your budget spirals out of control. So and it did. So that there was, and it caused all kinds of problems. Because it was shot in October, and I didn't go to the main shoot. I went to some of the pickups later on, but there were all kinds of weather problems, and the schedule went out the window fairly early on. So I think there were kind of advantages and disadvantages of doing it out there, but it did mean they could be contained
Right.
So it was all the locations were in the quarry, and then the bar was where they also put a lot of the actors up. They had a bed and breakfast, so they put a lot of the actors up there. So it was kind of, they fed people there. Yeah, so it was all quite self-contained. But,
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Sticking with the location kind of thing, this is sort of veering off course just very, very, very quickly. I believe you're from Stoke-on-Trent. This is probably something that's not been brought up before.
No,
only,
happy to discuss.
Only because my wife and I, we went to Staffordshire Uni, and we lived up in
no
Stoke.
way.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
We lived up there for 3 years while we were up there. Just
oh, wow.
We were on the main sort of Leek Road campus, and then we lived just on the up in Shelton, just on the outskirts of Hanley for a couple of years. So,
amazing.
So how I needed to ask, really, knowing what the kind of things you write and everything. Did Stoke or any part of Stoke influence anything you've written at all?
I don't know if yes and no. I think it did. I think it did and it didn't. I mean, I got out of Stoke as soon as I could.
It's a bit like me. I'm from Basingstoke, and that's the first thing I did when I could at 18. So I did get out.
Yeah, and I don't think. Well, this is the thing. I think it's not necessarily to do with the place. It's to do with that kind of. I don't know. I just needed to so I'm in Worthing now, just outside Brighton. But and I think. And this is off topic, but I think part of that as well was and I think things have changed now because of the internet. But I think certainly when I was left uni, it was because I moved back to Stoke briefly, and it was just harder to get stuff done. Like when I moved down to Brighton, and we did the film I did in Brighton, 10 Dead Men, that I wrote, like that came about quite organically. There were just loads of people with equipment and making stuff, and when I've done short films down here, it's always easy to find people because it's a place full of creative people. Stoke-on-Trent may well be like that now. I don't know, but it wasn't when I was certainly when I was a teenager. It felt like quite cut off from the rest of the world. But definitely, like this, one of the things I always remember where we lived. There was I lived in Milton, which is a little village, and there was a small canal, and then over the canal there was this abandoned railway track, and I used to go walking up and down there all the time, and that had like these had all these like old sort of pottery factories and things along it, and some of them really kind of like. Some of them still working, but some of them really sort of like broken down and abandoned and stuff. And that, like, I always think of that. It always reminded me of, I don't know if you know Eraserhead, the David Lynch film.
Yes.
Like there's a bit in that way kind of walks off. I think he only goes to the factory and there's the whole actual Eraserhead bit. But it's sort of like, I don't know, I suppose a bit industrial and a bit, but also a bit kind of run down. And there was a lot of that around. So I don't know if that sort of. And also, I think that even though I didn't feel connected to the filmmaking, because filmmaking was London and Hollywood and all too far away to be real, I did sort of. I was a huge Clive Barker fan growing up, and he was Liverpool, and that was within reach. We used to go there on school trips and things. So so there was kind of. I think there were kind of bits of that that fed into.
I totally get that. My housemate and I can't think, it was probably in our second year when we were up at uni. We both got a summer job at the Sainsbury's distribution centre just down from the Britannia Stadium. Oh, okay. And we walked from our house up, like I say, in Shelton, and we used to walk all the way down, and we walked like by the canal around the back of like the industrial sections or whatever at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And if I was on my own, I don't think I would have done it. It didn't feel like the safest place or the safest route to take. But that's really cool.
We always used to walk back from Hanley when we were had a few beers and go these weird routes. But it was I think that's, I mean, there's some really nice countryside around there as well. It's a weird, I think that like it's a weird. Stoke-on-Trent's such a weird place. I think partly because of the fact that it's made up of the different towns. It doesn't feel like it's got its own like almost doesn't feel like it's got its own identity.
No.
It sort of has if you live there, but also not quite. Like it doesn't really have a center. It doesn't.
Yeah. It's all these separate places. Again, completely get that. We treated them like separate places. Yeah. We would go, where are we going to? We're going to Stoke. We're not going Hamley. We're going to Stoke because Stoke Town was completely different in a way. You know, it was a separate entity to Hamley. So yeah. Oh, good time. Sorry, I was just a bit random on the throw in there, but when I saw that, I thought, I got to bring it up.
That was great. I have to talk about Stoke.
So let's move on to your sort of novel writing side,
right?
So your horror novel that you've got out, Astaroth,
I
believe. So let's talk about that. Is that when did that come out? Give us a bit of a premise about it. I've read the synopsis this morning and it sounds brilliant.
Oh, cool.
So introduce us to it. And
so that came. It was last year, I think. I published it, and it was. So the premise is that there's this woman in Brighton, and her dad's died, and she's inherited this house, and the house is haunted. It's a straightforward premise. House is haunted. Like she knows there's something wrong with the house, and she speaks to try and sort it out because she wants to sell the house. She speaks to two ghost hunters, and one of them is like this big TV ghost hunter who's had his own show but is kind of on the decline, and the other one is a total skeptic who is interested in kind of investigating, but he's had this one paranormal experience when he was a kid, so he's interested in investigating it, but he totally is a skeptic. He goes to things to debunk them, and so he's kind of jealous of they have this sort of professional rivalry because he's never had the success that the other guy said, because the other guy is more like likely to kind of fake stuff. Well, this is his opinion anyway, that he's sort of will do whatever and make a big deal out of stuff. And this other the skeptic is more like, no, this is a science, we have to actually do this properly, and it takes time. And so by a sort of circumstance, because they end up, she thinks neither of them are going to do it, but in the end they both turn up, and it sort of escalates from there. They both have these very different approaches, and it's a book really about belief. Fairly early on something happens, and it's sort of up to the characters and the reader to really work out, well, not to work out, but to decide whether they believe it's how bad it is, or if they believe it's serious or not, or paranormal or not, and it's and it's very I suppose like similar to I think it's obvious my background in screenwriting is obvious because it's all set in one room. Mostly it starts off in a few different places, but most of it's set in this one room over this one afternoon, this sort of one ghost investigation. But it gets sort of quite crazy towards the end.
Cool.
But it's
I was going to say, is it part of the series? Am I right in thinking? Or
yes.
Is it a standalone?
So it is part of the series. I've started writing the next one. It's a standalone story in itself. There is a framing narrative about this kind of blogger who is a mortician, who she interprets these stories from dead bodies, and then that's the conceit, is that she's still publishing these stories. So that story carries on. I think I'm still planning to do 3. I've got and then I'll probably cap it at that, but there will be a through line, and the third one will kind of resolve all of that. But the second one again is going to be a standalone story on its own.
Cool. Look forward to that one. Look forward to that. So in terms of we could look at it from your filmmaking, your screenwriting aspect, and your novel writing. Who are some of the figures that you are inspired by, or that you feel that you may be influenced by in any way over the years with your writing?
I think all kinds of things, really. I mean, when I was growing up, it was Clive Barker, John Carpenter, obviously. I think probably everyone who's into horror, I grew up in the 1890s, probably says that. But Carpenter and Ramsey Campbell in terms of novels was a big influence.
Okay.
And also I like M.R. James, the kind of classic ghost stories.
Yes.
And I think that kind of links into the Japanese horror films. I'm a big fan of the Japanese horror films, and I think that there's a real crossover between the M.R. James stuff and a lot of the Japanese horror films. Like if you look at Ring or The Grudge, like the ghosts and those things. There's this thing that happens in I think that, and it does happen in other stuff as well, but particularly in M.R. James and in Japanese horror films, if the ghost gets you, then you're done. Like if you encounter one of their ghosts, that's it. Like there's no getting out of it. You're going to die horribly. And there's none of this kind of, oh, if we find this thing and bury it somewhere, then the ghost will be put to rest and everything will be happy. There's none of that so I quite like that kind of dark sort of
ghost films. I can read ghost stories. One of my favorite horror authors is James Herbert.
Right.
Ghosts of Sleeth is one of my favorite books of all time.
Oh, cool.
And it just had me. I mean, there's a couple of his books that I used to read on my lunch breaks at work, and I started off reading others, and it's the first one that I was towards the end and I couldn't put it down, so I walked back to work from my car reading, because I had to know before I got back what happened and everything. And no other writer's really done that to me. But from a film point of view, ghost stories never really excite me. From the off, unless they're like that, like you just said, like there is something really, I mean, it's obvious to say about horror film, but really quite horrific, and sort of chilling about it, rather than this thing you don't see that does things you do see, and you never really get a sense of what it is or until the end.
I've always been drawn to like supernatural things, because I think when it works, and if a ghost story can make you scared, because I don't believe in ghosts, like I'm not a sort of superstitious person. I don't really, and I think that's why it's so great, is this idea that like this thing that I know doesn't exist, but that if a film can leave me scared of that, scared to turn the light off, because of something that I know can't happen. I just think that's really incredible that works.
There's one film out there, and people are probably gonna laugh at this again, because there's some of the things I've written I can write about, but there's growing up, one of the films that scared the hell out of me was E.T. I still can't watch it, absolutely hate it. Really freaks me out. So from a horror film point of view, there's been one in the last few years called Alien Abduction, which is one of these kind of found footage sort of things, and there was really something about it. It's the way it's shot. It's whenever the aliens are on screen, you get a static on the camera, so you don't see them, but you know they're coming. And it's just things you don't see almost that make it really. And that's one film that I in the last few years I've struggled to go off to sleep after watching.
Oh wow.
And one of the books that I'm going to be working on this year, that I started years and years ago, is an alien abduction story. And I think because I've struggled to write it, because I've actually got a genuine fear of it. And it's almost like I relate to it too much. You know. And again, that's something someone could say that'll never happen. You know, it's something so far out there, you know, science fiction that it might be happening. You don't know. But
well, that's the thing, because what I really struggle with is like home invasion films, because that's too real.
And I hear that from so many people. You know, they're the ones that don't, straight off the bat, they don't do anything for me. They don't draw me into it, because I like monster films. I like things that are very visual, and that to me doesn't have. It's not a visual element, but when you get sucked into it and you realize, okay, that could happen. Someone could be. I can go down to my kitchen. Our garden's pitch black, and quite often I would think, what if there's somebody there? I don't know about it. You know? Definitely. So people, I've heard this, and I think I heard it on one of the other podcasts that you've done, but I've heard this before. Is people say they won't watch horror films because they're too horrific or they're not believable or whatever, but they'll watch true crime documentaries of stuff that actually happens.
Yeah.
Things that
I mean, I think
a lot scarier in that.
Yeah. I mean, I've always approached horror as like a roller coaster. Like I love like horror mazes and like horror experiences and things like that. And I love VR and like VR horror experience. Like I played Resident Evil 7. I played all of that in VR, and it's horrible.
Wow.
Like, the whole thing was like,
I've played half of that on the Xbox, and it freaked me out enough. Yeah, that was that one. I played all the others, and they haven't really had that effect. The Silent Hill did. Resident Evil 7 was really creepy.
There's something about especially when you're in VR. I think it's the VR is always, the horror stuff in VR is always scarier when nothing's happening, and it's the anticipation, which it's true of films as well. But because there's something about it being that you're the one in control. There's a bit in Resident Evil 7. There's quite early on. There's a bit where your sort of wife in it, I think, is possessed, and she kind of she disappears down into a basement, and there's nowhere else to go except down into this basement, and you can just hear her laughing.
Yeah,
and it's pitch black, and you're like, I don't want to go down there.
No.
And there were a few times I turned it on and just didn't go anywhere. I was like, no, I can't do it tonight. I can't do it. And it was almost like forcing yourself to do it. But then I don't know, when you do it, it's I think there is a sort of roller, like it is, because you used to. I think John Carpenter said this as well, but you get through it and you survived, and it's like, oh, I did that. And
yeah.
That's when horror works, it's great.
Oh, absolutely. And this is the thing. This is where we get frustrated with horror at times, because we'll stick a film on and we don't last 20 minutes within it because it's lost us completely, and it's just so either badly produced, badly acted, or the idea is just really, really terrible. And you get some that are absolutely blinding that you almost don't want to end, because I
also think a lot of it is context, and I think it's about films anyway. Like, I do think that I think we put too much stock in whether something is on the surface good or bad. But so much of it relates to, like, and sometimes you have to open yourself up to it, but I think a lot of it does relate to personal experience. Like, when I saw the one I always refer back to is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. When I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was when it was re-released.
Yes,
obviously it was banned for years. It was re-released. It's in the 90s, I guess. And I went on my own just to the Odeon in Stoke, and it was the middle of the day, and I was like, I just want to go and see it. I knew none of my mates would be interested because it was old, so I just went on my own, and I was the only one there, and it was horrible. Like, it was just, and I felt like that film when it came out afterwards. It really felt like it sort of changed, like, because it came out, it was still daylight, it was summer, so it was really bright, came out into the sort of sunlight, and suddenly you're looking at everyone going, I don't trust anyone anymore. They all could be weird. They all could be like that family. So
the one thing,
but just the intensity of it in that cinema, and you couldn't go anywhere. It's just me. And
I said the idea as well that it had been banned before. This is what drew me in. I didn't see it in the cinema. I don't know how old I was, but Channel 4 broadcast it one Saturday night. It must have been Halloween, possibly. And I managed, I don't know how I did, because I shouldn't have really been old enough to watch it, but I managed to stay up late enough to see the first part of it, because I saw in the paper, I was just flicking through the paper at my nan and granddad's, and it said this banned film has finally been released on TV. And I was like, what's so bad about it? You get to that initial scene where you see Leatherface and he pulls the screen back, takes the guy down, takes him, and then he's got the girl and he puts her on the hook. That whole bit, for me, that was it. I had to turn it off. That is, I think, where I was introduced to horror.
I mean, it's just so weird. The whole way it's not shot, and I think Toby even made some great films, but I think, like, there's something when you look into the making of it, I think it seems like they were all going a bit mad. It was, they had no money. It was really a really tough shoot. And I think it's almost, I don't want to like take anything away from him, but I do think there's something almost accidental about how like messed up and the weird atmosphere it's got. Like I think it's, you can feel the heat, like the sort of sweat and it's just a grimy, gross film. Like it's sort of I don't know. I think it's really good.
And
but we don't. I think we've lost that in a way, that sense of the band film where you just because nothing's, you know, I think
anymore.
Like no, and we had like there was the sort of the video nasties and the sort of like that whole era and of stuff that you kind of go, oh, I've got to see that. But it's it's hard to imagine if something gets banned now, it's for really bad reasons. You're like, no, I don't actually want to see that.
And a lot of it probably be like politically correctness as well and things like that, probably than anything else. We were discussing Evil Dead the other night, actually,
right,
how that started, because that was very much like an indie film. And it's almost like the charm of the indie film seems to be lost a lot, because I feel a lot of these, they try to make themselves look like an indie film about to be a bit that can be accepted as a cult film. And I think if you try to do that, it's obvious and you see right through it. You know, the ones that are just made on a shoestring, I don't know, just for a group of friends that want to do it, want to watch it, and all of a sudden it takes off. That's what I kind of think if Paintball Massacre, you know, could be picked up like that, because I think it really fits the British aesthetic perfectly for a horror film. You know, so if the right people get on with it. But it really is when you can see that a film's trying to look as budget as possible so it could be accepted as real kind of underground hit. Whatever.
I think we're in this weird sort of, I think it's this weird time at the moment, because I think anything that comes out is kind of even by its nature is kind of referencing so much other stuff and so much other culture now. It's hard, it's quite hard, but then I still see stuff that surprises me. I really like that film, that most recent horror film I saw that I really liked was have you seen In the Earth, the Ben Wheatley?
No.
It was one he made over, I think he made over lockdown. I'm not a huge Ben Wheatley fan generally, but I just sort of like Kill List and stuff, but like I wouldn't necessarily seek him out, but it was just like on, and I was on something and I watched it, and it was I really liked it. Like it's sort of I think, and I always go back to this, I think it's what it is about that film is it's the because it's just the two sort of researchers get lost in the woods and there's a creepy guy and then there's a whole thing with mushrooms, but the sort of the characters are in it are they're really well acted. I think that's something Ben really does do really well, is he works with his actors really well, but there's a sort of authenticity to the characters, and that just drew me in with those characters. And then you go, as I was talking about the Paintball Massacre, as soon as I care about it, I don't necessarily have to like them, but as soon as I'm invested in what they're doing, it's like, oh, now I don't want anything to happen to them, and then stuff starts happening, and you're like, oh, but that's one that I thought was really well done. So I think there's always new stuff out that's still good.
It's almost like you got some people think you got to push the boundaries, make things shocking for them to be scary. And as I've got older, I've appreciated less is more to a degree. I think there's got to be some substance there. I don't want to go through a film where I still don't know what's happened, you know, except something happened on its own, but I can't see what caused it, sort of thing. You know, I feel really unfulfilled with that. But just sort of when Saw came along, I think things like torture porn, as they call it, became too much of a thing. There was way too many that followed that blueprint. It wasn't original anymore.
It did, but then that did give us Martyrs, and I love Martyrs.
Oh, okay.
Martyrs is a great film. But,
fair enough.
I don't. But then again, all this stuff is sort of, it depends where you come at it from. But
I will say what I loved about the Saw franchise, and probably the same like Final Destination, is the ingenious ways you can kill people. You know, it was always, I was always like, what are they going to do next? Not that I was wanting to be shocked by it. It's like, from a writing perspective, actually, it's just the imagination that goes into it, I think.
Well, that was in Paintball Mexico, that was the gag with the guts and the key. That was sort of a riff on Saw. My thinking was, what if there's a character who when given the gross scenario, just goes, I'm just going to do it.
Why not? Someone's got to do it.
Yes.
And it was, I'm trying to remember which character did that, because I think I was quite surprised by it being them.
Oh, it was Lauren. It was the sweary.
Yeah. So out of everyone, mind you, there's one surprise in that which really did draw me in is the casting of Lee from Steps.
Oh right, yeah.
Very, very. I was like, I'd never even thought he would be in a film, let alone one like this. So I was intrigued to see what would happen to him. So that was.
Well, I was going back to this. That was. So he was in 10 Dead Men as well. So he's a friend of Brendan, the producer, and he was in 10 Dead Men, and he I don't think he even had lines in 10 Dead Men.
He was just one of the dead men. So.
Yeah, I mean, he was, but yeah, I think he had a couple of like 10 Dead Men was one of those films we filmed at weekends, and we just would get like there was a script, but we would just get. And it was mostly the producer and the director they would just get whoever's available, whatever we can get, and like we'd have these crazy meetings where like the producer Phil would be like, "Oh, I think I can get a helicopter. Can you write in a helicopter?" I'm like, I don't know. Space. And it's so many versions of that script. That would just have all kinds of craziness. But then we got to bring you back to horror. We got So by the end, we had this real sort of mess of there was a revenge film. It was just a straightforward revenge film. It was a real kind of mess, but it didn't. It needed to kind of some coherence, and so we'd already planned to give it a narration, and we again, I think it was Phil's sort of random idea. We got Doug Bradley to be the narrator in it,
right?
And that was sort of. That could have pulled it all together. I mean, whether it works or not today, I don't know. But it did kind of. It was this weird thing where everything was shot, and I did another rewrite on it, and just kind of, we did it as this kind of, as if he was telling this weird kind of dark fairy tale about all his characters.
So your work as the writer on these, it's never really done. So you always kind of imagine the writing comes first. The script is there, you pass it over, that's the job done, But there's calls to kind of change it even as it's being shot.
I think on bigger projects, I think that is generally how it works, because if you've got a contract, most people aren't going to do more work than they're contracted to do or being paid for. But on these where it's been like so London Heist was very much like that. Like I did the rewrite, and I think I did. I think I probably did do a bit more than I was supposed to. We worked on it for as long as it took, but then that was it. It was done. Like I think it took them 2 or 3 years to get it shot and out, and then but with a Paintball Massacre, I think again it was a much smaller project, and also because I was working with friends as well, and it was a much more personal, but not personal like that happened to me, but like personal in like of all the stuff I've done in films, it's probably the most, like if I show that to friends, they go, "Oh yeah, I can tell you wrote that," like because it's got basically it's got like the weird Fast and Furious bit in, and these sort of weird little quirks and things that are very kind of me, and so so on that one it was more a case of that I really wanted to do whatever it took to get it made. And when I ended up working on it right the way through to the very end on that one, because they shot for 4 weeks, and the film was probably about, because of various issues I was sort of alluded to earlier, weather and things like that, scheduling issues, it was only about 70% of the script was done, was shot, and then there's no money to sort of get they needed like another to do it properly. It was going to take another week or probably 2 weeks of reshoots. So rather than kind of go down that route, we kind of went back to the script, and we were like, what the producer Jay said to me, well, what can we, is there anything we can cut down, or can we minimize it to the point where, so we kind of, I think what we ended up doing was they edited what they had, and then I looked at that edit and was like, right, well, we definitely need a scene where this happens,
right,
and things like that, and then we just did a weekend of reshoots in the end, and that sort of pulled it all together. But yeah, right up until the end, or even when they were doing the sound They were sending me the edit and stuff, which was great. Like I mean, yeah, well, it was just nice to be to see it through, really, because otherwise you just don't hear from stuff normally until it's out. And then but like with London Heist, by then you're like, I have no connection, don't feel any connection to this at all. So being involved all the way through. I mean, we went and did I thought, it's a shame, it's obviously lockdown and everything happened, but we did manage in one of the sort of breaks in lockdown, we managed to get a screening room in London, and we took a bunch of us went up to see it, and that was like, it really felt like I'd seen it through from like writing it in the beginning to here we all now watching it, and I'd sort of been involved all the way through. But yeah, which I think is quite rare, but yeah, it was that I really enjoyed that.
Cool. From a last couple of questions here before we start to wrap up, unfortunately. So from a one horror writer to another and screenwriter, what path would one follow if we wanted to? We all want to see our, like I said at the beginning, we all want to see our books up there on the screen. That's the dream, especially for me. What route does a writer need to take, if any, to be able to do that?
I would say, because I don't like, I mean, I'm in a way still in the same boat, but I would say to just go and make stuff. Like, it's sort of, it's not as hard. Like, I think once you start kind of like making, because I think what a lot of people want to do, there is this sort of aspect, particularly in screenwriting, people do screenwriting because I guess coming at it from another angle, like one of the great things about books and about self-publishing books is that, like, you get to see, like I said with Paintball Massacre, but you get to see the whole project through to completion, and you get it out. But with films, the big issue with films is that they cost so much money. It's so much money to make. Like I was saying about the hotel costs and things. Until you look into it, like, until you're sort of involved in it, you don't. It's really hard to. And even then, the amounts of money that are being spent on films, it's and even though, but like even some of the films that you probably think are quite low budget are probably like a few $100,000 even today. Like I think that's still the case, just because of the costs involved in getting that many people to work and like paying that many people to do for a few weeks, and then all the post-production costs and everything. So but what you get therefore is this idea that if you that you sort of sit there and write a great script, that it almost becomes like you're sort of writing a lottery ticket. You're spending like a couple of years, but you've got this thing that you hope is going to win you millions of pounds. It's that, because it is that random. It is like I know there are competitions and you can send stuff off, and there are ways that people, but that sort of like, so as a counter to that, the way I've always done things is just by just making stuff. Like all the films I've made, they've all come through connections, like, working on people's short films, having like a community, like I had in Brighton, there's a community of filmmakers, and that was how I got that's how I got London Heist, was through friends who I'd worked with on 10 Dead Men. Paintball Massacre was friends, again, it was a lot of those same people, but I find if you kind of just start working, so I would say if you've got something like that you want to see on screen, the best thing to do, like maybe making a whole film is a bit unrealistic, but what you could do is either take a short story and make that into a short film, or even just take a scene. If you write a scene and either get some like I mean everywhere's got there are great actors everywhere. This is the other thing, because again, acting is another profession that's really competitive. But I've worked with so many incredible actors that sort of will do stuff just because they want to collaborate and act and things. So and with the internet you can put calls out and things. So I would definitely recommend just getting something together, because there's still, you kind of learn so much from doing that, just by seeing even just the table read, even just getting people together. If you write a script and then just get some people, it's what something I do on everything, but everything, whatever level. Like on Paintball Massacre, we did it even before we'd cast it. We got just some friends together, and we met up in London and got a studio, sort of hired a studio, and we just did a read through the script, and it was to help the writing. Really, it wasn't necessarily part of the production. It was like I could do with hearing these voices and voices that were not my own. So, but even from that, you get a sense of how this will look and what works and what doesn't, and so and I always think that the solution is just to make stuff, and then things tend to happen.
Awesome. But, you never know. That wasn't just for me, that was for anyone watching this who may be in the same vein, so it wasn't totally selfish, but cool. So I'll make this my final question. Theoretically then, I like to sort of do these theoretical kind of things where I can. Is there a book, it doesn't have to be horror, but it can be, since we've been talking about it. Is there a book out there and that you would absolutely love to be involved in putting on the screen that may not have been done already?
Yeah, there is. I've got an answer for this. Yeah, it's the book, the Hungry Moon by Ramsey Campbell. I don't know if you've read it, but it's like it's sort of I guess it's folk horror. I don't know. This may be in development. I've not looked. I almost daren't look into it in case it is. Someone's making it. But in some ways, I'd love to see it. In some ways, I'd just love to see it. It would make a great series. But it's just about this little village, and there's it's hard to really explain what goes on. But there's this hole in the woods, and there's something in the hole, and it's sort of driving some of the villagers a bit mad, and this whole kind of cult builds up around it, and it's just really, I don't know, it's really good. It's really creepy, and
sounds just up my street. I might find
definitely check it out. Yeah, Hungry Moon. But it's very, again, very British. Like, it's very kind of you can't imagine it being like told anywhere else in a way. Like I sometimes I find that sometimes we had all these great. You mentioned James Herbert. One of my favorite books of his was Shrine, and they made that into a film recently with I can't remember the guy's name, the Negan from Walking Dead, Jeffrey Dean Morgan. So they made it with him they called it something else, and it's in American. It's got him and Carrie Elwes, a few other people, and it's okay. Like. And I'm not like a nationalist. I'm not like, that you've lost the Britishness, but it's like, it is sort of a shame. That we sort of there are these sort of great like there's all this great source material for British horror, and a lot of it just gets remade in America.
And they don't quite, they lack that charm, and there's something something more gritty, I find, with doing it. Cool. Brilliant. Listen, Chris, this has been amazing. I feel like I could do this again, sort of down the road. I feel like I could really go down a few rabbit holes with yourself. Before I let you go, obviously we've talked about a lot of your stuff that you've been involved in. Let everyone know where they can find you if you're on social media, but also where they can find your films, buy your book. I would say Paintball Massacre is out there on Amazon Prime. That's how I watched it. Let everyone know where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, so I suppose I'm CG_Regan on Twitter, and I've got a website, peopleinthedark.com. That's got links to all my books. But if you go on, all the books on Amazon, Astaroth is the most recent, and I would definitely, if you're going to start with one, start with that one. So,
cool. Awesome, brilliant. I'll definitely be checking that out myself. My to be read pile is slowly dwindling now.
Right.
I've been getting back into reading, so I'll definitely check that out.
Oh, cool.
And, at some point, when the show comes back, I'll happily do another one of these with you. It's been great talking to you, mate. Thank you so much for your time.
That's all right. No, it was great. I enjoyed it.
No, cool. So hopefully speak to you again soon. But Chris Regan, thank you so much, mate. Been awesome.
No problem. Cheers.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, share, and hit the subscribe button. Also follow us on Facebook and Instagram to keep updated about all future shows.